And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as usual by my co-host, Mat Mlodzinski, with another edition of CBB Rank, counting down 5 teams to the start of the regular college basketball season. Today, we've got 65 through 61 on our CBB Rank. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content. We're counting down all the way to 1. And also be sure to check out the link in our bio to our site where we have team profiles of every single one in written form. So be sure to check that out as well. Well, let's get started, Matt, with number 65 on our list. We got Georgia. I mean, last year they struggled in conference play as expected, but actually ended up backdooring their way into a 20-win season. They made a little bit of a run in the NIT. Those wins are included in that 20, but still a solid year for Georgia, all things considered. And here's the thing, Matt, they have recruited very well from the high school ranks. 5-star Asa Newell is expected to operate from the power forward spot, just a guy who's a freak athlete and a good shooter, someone who will operate well in Mike White's fast-paced system. They also got another top 50 guy in Somto Cyril, who comes in as another front court option, most likely off the bench. This is a pretty intriguing Georgia team with, I feel like, a good mix of youth and veterans.
I have a lot of thoughts on Georgia, Dan, and they're good thoughts about this Georgia team.
Right.
I like how you mentioned Asa Newell because, this is a good thought, right? I mean, this guy is a top 20 recruit, right? Like, you would expect him to thrive in this role. I'm only concerned because typically when you look at the top 20 recruits, right, they're always going to the same handful of schools. And Georgia, for the most part, has not been a consistent top 20 recruit getter, right? So you just want to make sure that he's in the right situation to thrive, because sometimes these guys will go to a little bit of a random school, not a Duke, not a Kentucky, in this case, Georgia. You need the right coaching. You need the right players around him, right? And I believe that they do. You look at the backcourt. You look at Silas Damari Jr., Tyron Lawrence coming in from Vanderbilt. And at 6-man, George Bagwell predicted Dakota LaFew. I mean, this guy was recruited heavily by high major programs. And you almost expect a guy like that to start wherever he goes, but that's how deep this Georgia backcourt is. And I think that just knowing that there's so many of these backcourt options, Asa Newell looks like he could thrive in that role. Justin Abson is a winner coming over from Appalachian State. The list goes on and on, Dan. There's a lot to like about this Georgia team.
Yeah, there's also Blue Kane, him along with Silas Damari, just freshmen that had their moments. Now they're going to be sophomores. Can they take leaps? There's a good chance they can. And another thing about this Georgia team is that last year Mike White played a lot of like 7 or 8 deep. But you look at the best Mike White teams, I'm talking back in his Florida days, he had a lot more options. He was running like 9, 10 guys. Maybe not every night, but on a given night, he can mix and match. And that is exactly what you could do with all these options. Deshane Montgomery, another guy, along with LaFew, who put up big numbers at Mount St. Mary's. RJ Godfrey from Clemson, he could reinforce that young front court. I feel like the theme with this Georgia team is exciting young guys and veteran backbones that'll kind of reinforce those guys and be like safety nets if they don't, because not everyone will live up to their full potential. That's just how sports and basketball work. But you have the safety net there, and that's important. So a perfect mix of youth and veterans, and I think Georgia is absolutely a dark horse to make the NCAA tournament.
I'm glad we agree on that. And before we move on to the next team, I just want to point out one more thing about this Georgia team. And I'm glad you mentioned RJ Godfrey, because you look at a guy that played 15, 16 minutes a game for a Clemson team that reached the Elite Eight last season. And now he's joining a team in Georgia that won 6 games in the SEC. And there's virtually, unless he replaces Blue Kane, there's no way that he starts on this Bulldogs team, which is just insane about the depth and the pieces that Mike White has at his disposal. And one more thing, there's a game on November 23rd and another one on November 24th. 2 Big East games, Marquette and St. John's. And I think those will tell the tale of how good this Georgia team is. Because you look at how great Marquette has been in the past few years, you look at what people expect Rick Pitino to have with the Johnnies. If Georgia's able to come home with at least one of those, if not both wins there, all of a sudden people are going to be talking about what Georgia can do in the SEC.
Good to see them testing themselves in the non-con and nice and early as well. Moving on, number 64, Louisville Cardinals. I think it's safe to say, Matt, this is the biggest coaching upgrade in the entire country. Of course, more an indictment of just how bad Kenny Payne was, but also, I mean, they're in great hands under Pat Kelsey. I've seen an argument for St. Louis being like the biggest coaching upgrade. I think it's absolutely Louisville. That's where my head's at. And here's the thing, Matt. Louisville is one of, I think, 7 or 8 teams I saw that has literally 0.0 returning minutes from last year. And that is definitely for the best for Louisville. And the thing is, their outgoing guys did actually end up going to mostly decent places. Like Trey White went to Illinois. Multiple guys are off to NC State. Sky Clark off to UCLA. Like, maybe they'll be able to, in their second stops, like, be decent players. Maybe the roster wasn't that bad. But I stand by the statement that, like, the roster overhaul is necessary and the coaching overhaul absolutely necessary. New era in Louisville basketball.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, this team was able to bring in a point guard like Chucky Hepburn, right? A guy who's played, his share of minutes, his share of time at Wisconsin, and more importantly, 1.2 turnovers per game last season. And throughout his career, Chucky Hepburn has been great at just holding on to the basketball, right? And I think that's key because we saw how mismanaged and how just you never knew what to expect from Louisville in the past couple seasons. They need someone like that to make sure that the ball is not going to be turned over, that the offense is going to be run, and there needs to be some sort of set, some sort of, like, what Louisville is going to bring to the court, right? Not all of this up in the air type of junk. And you get him with Terrence Edwards, a winner at James Madison, and again, a coach like Pat Kelsey. I'm feeling great about Louisville, or about Georgia. I'm feeling excited about Louisville. Like, with Georgia, I kind of expect them to be a good team. With Louisville, it's tough. You got a new coach. You got a bunch of new players. So I don't want to put the expectations there, but I'll definitely say I'm excited about the potential.
Especially the offense. I think the offense has tremendous upside. I mean, we talk about upgrades, and Torvik has them projected as the 28th best offense in the country. Of course, that's only a projection, but Kenny Payne didn't crack the top 175. So that's quite the upgrade right there. I think Terrence Edwards absolutely does not get enough love. Like, he was the best player on a James Madison team that made the tournament, won a tournament game. I think he needs more love as one of the better transfers from this cycle. And their entire top 8 has that scoring upside. Of course, there's downside, but focusing on the upside, you got Javon Hadley, Keon Johnson, even Traore and Rain Smith off the bench. Like, these are all guys who have scored the rock at their previous stops. Javon Hadley, I think, could be a breakout star. Last year, you look at Colorado, it was Cody Williams, Tristan Da Silva, KJ Simpson. Hadley was low-key really good, though. People don't realize that. Like, he had his moments, but overall, he was just super efficient, and him stepping up into a bigger role might be really good for his, like, volume numbers. Overall, like, it's completely fair to be as skeptical on Louisville as we are. Like, we're ranking them 64th. A lot of people are talking top 5, top 4 in the ACC. I'm not there yet. I just think confidence will return to this program. New coach, a lot of transfers, and obviously, like you said, it's not definitive how it's all going to piece together because there's no proven superstars at the power conference level, but I think competence is just like a coach that knows what he's doing is just a big deal for Louisville.
Well, and Louisville was a terrible three-point shooting team under Kenny Payne, right? And to be fair, most of the things that they did were terrible. But three-point shooting, I mean, they were near the bottom. And that's one thing Pat Kelsey is changing here, right? Hadley, 42% from 3. Terrence Edwards, 34% from 3. Noah Waterman, I mean, he's their center, shoots 37% from 3. They've got guys on the bench. Clearly, Pat Kelsey is making the right adjustments by who he's recruiting, and we'll see if it translates on the court.
All right, number 63, we got New Mexico. Richard Pitino is the head man there. He has really built up this program. Like, they just won the Mountain West title, the tournament title this past season, winning 26 games overall. They did get blown out in the first round by Clemson. Clemson ended up making the Elite Eight, like you just alluded to. So maybe not the biggest deal in the world, but just overall a great season. And I wrote this was my article, and we talked about Colorado State, we talked about Utah State, and just like how wide the variety of outcomes is with those two teams. A lot of question marks. UNM is like a safe bet to at least be solid, but also a team with a limited ceiling, in my opinion. I have a pretty good feel for how New Mexico is going to be, and it's going to be like top 3 Mountain West, but not necessarily like single-digit seed type team. That's how I'm feeling right now.
I agree with you, and I feel like for some reason our Mountain West rankings have just been flip-flopped from how they should be, because I feel like we've said this, or at least I've said this before, like there's other Mountain West teams that maybe deserve to be higher than New Mexico. And I agree with you. I think we know what they're going to be, right? We know that Donovan Dent is a great player. We know what Nelly Jr. Joseph is going to bring. It seems like he's been playing college basketball for a long time, by the way. Like that name has been in just the country. Just if you follow college basketball, you know who that is, and you have for a while. But a guy like True Washington is going to have to step up, right? Because you lose JT Toppin, you lose Jamal Mashburn Jr. and Jalen House. And were those guys sporadic at points last season? I think so. I think that maybe it's okay that New Mexico can move on from those guys, because at some points I'm watching their offense and I'm like, what is going on, man? Like, what are these shot selections? Like, I know these are great players, but sometimes there can be a little bit too much of that. So I'm excited to see if New Mexico decides to rein it in a little bit, but I just don't know if they have the pieces to contend for the Mountain West title. I think that they're going to be right near the top of the conference. I don't think they're a top 3 team in this conference.
Yeah, it's some of it's a little interesting. Like I do love Nelly Jr. Joseph, to be clear. Like I think he could be a massive two-way player. For a while, he's been like a good offensive, great defensive player. But I actually had him as my team MVP over Donovan Dent because in addition to his elite rim protection, like he's now, we talked about JT Toppin transferring up in the past. He's now going to be that guy that you're going to feed on the block. And he was one of the more efficient post bigs in the country last year. So I think he'll put up big numbers. The starting lineup overall is honestly not that bad. I think it's the depth that they don't have, the bench in specific. And this is a team that loves to run up and down the court. This is a very fast tempo team. And that worries me. Also, the addition of CJ Noland, he's from North Texas. Interesting ad. Like, he's a good player, but stylistically, does he really fit the system? Like, North Texas is that slow tempo, high efficient. Or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, North Texas is like a slow tempo type team. He's a high efficiency guy. That's the opposite of New Mexico, who just, like I said, likes to run up and down. So we'll see if he could kind of make that adjustment, whether that's better for him. But overall, that's what I think of New Mexico. Like high floor, low ceiling.
Yep.
They got a fun style, but there will be some pretty poor offensive nights for them, in my opinion.
Yeah. Maybe Nolan can help with that.
Yeah. He could shoot for sure. Very efficient shooter. All right, number 62. We got VCU. I'm going to turn this over to you in a sec because I think this was your article, Matt.
Yep.
Year one for Ryan Odom went, I would say good, not great, right? They won 24 games, and they made a run in the NIT. Of course, VCU is a pretty storied program. They have high expectations there. And I think one thing before I turn it over to you that I'm going to point out is a lot of people, when they evaluated the A10 last year, didn't realize how much of a significant jump they took from 2 years ago to last year. Like 2 years ago, the A10 was terrible. And people kind of just assumed that was the same case once again. The A10 was vastly improved last year, and I think they'll make another slight step up this year. So you look at VCU with an 11-7 record, that's no slouch. They were a solid team.
Yeah, VCU, I think, and I watched them live in person last season against St. Bonaventure, a game that they were up a lot of points by and ultimately blew the game to the Bonnies. It was a very exciting game. But one thing I saw was Max Shoga, and I wrote a little bit about him in this article because he had looked like he was going to go to Villanova, practically committed there. All of a sudden comes back to VCU. And you start to think, okay, wow, this VCU team might have something, right? Like you got a team that brings back practically everything. I mean, you look at what they lose, Sean Bairstow, Quaney Quay, Toibu Lawal, like solid pieces, right? But overall, Bairstow probably the biggest loss. It's a team that brings back a lot of their starters. I mean, they're bringing back Jackson, Shulga, Joe Bamisile, who again will probably come off the bench again, but pretty much will play starter minutes. Ryan Odom has a lot at his disposal. I'm excited to see how he uses it, though, because I looked at this adjusted tempo for VCU, right? And you look at having a spearhead of guards, other solid big men, and they just did not put up a lot of shots, right? And this kind of shocked me, honestly. Here's a stat that I wrote. They were just inside the top 300 in adjusted tempo, 350 in field goal attempts per game. But they did launch the 90th most threes in the country. So in other words, VCU is going to pick their spots, but more often than not, it's going to be from behind the arc, right? I mean, they got a guy like Shulga. They got guys that they're going to shoot threes. I just want to see maybe a little bit more efficiency and attention to detail on offense, right? Because to me, that screams a team that can't get into their offense, can't get the shot they want, and end up just settling for a three. That's what that screams to me.
Yeah.
And I think they have enough talent where they don't have to do that, and they could be a little bit better at picking and choosing better shots.
Sounds very like Virginia, like UVA-esque. That's what it reminds me of, like slow, deliberate, settling for bad threes and late in the shot clock. Maybe on a smaller scale, but when you went through that speech, that's what I was kind of reminded of. But yeah, like Shulga is that guy that, on the other hand, is the go get me a bucket player that not all VCU teams have had. And I think that's what really raises their ceiling, will allow them to win a lot of close games. I think Jack Clark is going to go back to being an impact player. He took a step down after taking a step up. I'm talking about like transfer wise. He had 3 good years at LaSalle in the A10, went to NC State, kind of struggled there, went to Clemson, struggled even more there, but he's back in the A10. And I think that's really where he belongs. So underrated addition there. Don't just look at his 4 points per game last year and be like, oh, sure, he's not that good. VCU also, they make their brand on defense, and I'm confident they'll be good defensively this year as well. Like Zeb Jackson, I looked at him. He had some really good defensive on-off numbers. Very much a better team, VCU, that is, with him on the floor. Christian Furman, if nothing else, is a great rim protector. And then I think the rest will just scheme its way into place because that's how Ryan Odom. That's just what happens at VCU. Matt, the way I look at the A10, I think it's wide open between 4 teams. 3 teams that we had in our top 3, and that's VCU, Dayton, St. Louis. I also think Loyola is in that mix. I think I'm higher on them than most of the site, but it's really just a 4-man, relatively even race, in my opinion. And VCU, of those 4 I just mentioned, might not have the most upside, but definitely has the least downside. I think they'll most likely to finish in a double bye spot at the top 4. It's VCU in the A10.
I can see that. I mean, I'm definitely high on. I think that Ryan Odom's a good coach. I want to see what he does with this team. I also wouldn't throw out St. Bonaventure either. Bringing in DeJounte Bowen and Melvin Council Jr. and just the way that Mark Schmidt has kind of consistently made St. Bonaventure a winner. They seem to always get better as the season goes on. I know that's kind of besides the point, but I do want to put them in that mix. I also want to shout out one more guy on VCU. He's the 10th man on their roster. He's a lefty, and his name is Brandon Jennings. I'm not saying that he's going to become the next Brandon Jennings. I'm just saying he's got the name for it.
There you go. All right. Number 61, finishing it off in the Big Ten, by the way. Washington.
That sounds weird.
Yeah, I know. I had to do a double take on that. But yeah, 7-year Mike Hopkins era is over. In comes Danny Sprinkle and a long line of coaches coming in from Utah State. And they've kind of all been good. So I'm expecting the same thing to happen for Danny Sprinkle. And I think really the portal has replenished this team for sure. But that being said, it looks a little like a mid-major all-star team, which you have to take precautions when you're competing with that style of a roster in the Big Ten, because you got guys from Rice, Portland, URI, North Dakota, Oakland. I'm sure you'll talk about Great Osibor, and he's absolutely no slouch, one of the better two-way bigs in college basketball. But outside of him, I don't know. I don't know what to make of this roster. What do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, Osibor is obviously why Washington's going to get a lot of credit, right? Because we know what he can do. We know that he's been a winner. He's been a consistent player over the years, and he should have no problems in the Big Ten, honestly. I mean, he was doing it at a high level at Utah State. He's not going to put up 17 or 18 and 9 in the Big Ten, but I can see him putting up 15 and 7. Like, I don't think he's going to struggle to put up some pretty good numbers. I'm excited to see what Tyler Harris does, a guy at Portland that shot the ball well, and I think he could be one of those mid-major guys that does fit well on this Washington team. But it's going to come down to, honestly, DJ Davis, right? Like, he played in the Big East. You look at a mid-major all-star team, I think that's a great way of putting it. But how's the Big East guy going to run the show, right? Because he's going to be having a lot of responsibilities on making sure that Washington runs smoothly. It's going to be Davis. It's going to be Osibor. Who else is going to step up? I think it's going to be how DJ Davis gets them involved. But you look at just how bad it was in Washington, right? Like, how does a team like that with Keon Brooks, Xavier Wheeler, Moses Wood, like, you were looking at what Washington had last year. I thought that it was going to be the year that Mike Hopkins figures it out.
Yeah.
And they go 3 wins short of 20. I mean, man, that's not good. Clearly, there was a long history of just it wasn't going well in Washington, right? Like, it wasn't going to be fixed. And they were down a rabbit hole right there. They got to get themselves out of it, and I think it's a good start.
Absolutely. I think they were definitely like better than their 17 and 15 record was. I'm not just talking about talent wise, but like just they got unlucky. They did not win their close games. Obviously, some of that is not just lack of luck, but just like not coming through in the spots they need to come through. But they were 59th in Torvik, so like this was not a horrible team last year. And the reason I want to point that out is because I think we have Washington ranked at 61. We're probably going to see something pretty similar this year. They're going to arrive there in a very different way, and I think the outlook of the team after the season will be a lot more positive for Washington fans. But I'm expecting another like 17-15 record, a little below 500 in conference play. The Big Ten is a much better league, and there's just the reason why I don't think their ceiling or floor is too high is just because there's so many question marks outside of Osibor.
They also have one of the worst non-conference schedules I've seen. I mean, Nevada, Colorado State, TCU or Santa Clara, and Washington State.
So you're saying they play nobody?
Yeah. I mean, well, like, are we even going to know what this team is until they face a Big Ten opponent?
No, but I think that's for the better for them. I think they want to rack up those bye game wins because it might be harder to come by in Big Ten play.
Yeah, and I don't want to shame those other teams too, because those are teams that we have in our top 100. Just because you're a top 100 team doesn't mean that you're necessarily – I mean, like, we're at number 61 right here as we're talking. Like, we've been at this countdown for weeks, over a month at this point, and we still aren't necessarily seeing teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament, right?
No.
Like, in the grand scheme of things, is Washington better than most of the teams in the whole land of college basketball? Yes.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what teams are going to make the tournament, what teams are going to advance, and Washington still has a ways to go.
Yeah, well, we're making our way towards one, so pretty soon we'll get to some real legitimate tournament contenders. But for today, that will do it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like at this episode and leave a comment if you've liked what you've heard. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.